The Perfect Guy is the 17th episode of the 5th season of Frasier. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I really liked the episode. It's maybe not the funniest. There were some funny moments, absolutely, but I really enjoyed the story. And thankfully, I had seen this before, I've seen the show before, but I couldn't remember where it was going, and I was really keen to find out, and I rather enjoyed the journey and the destination. Starts off with Niles buying cheese from a rather expensive shop, and Martin's there with Eddie. I was quite surprised that Eddie was allowed in a shop, any shop really, but certainly one that's that expensive, but nevertheless, Eddie is there, and Martin buys this dog food. I think it was $6 a can, if I remember rightly. And Martin makes some comments about the price of the shop. And Martin ultimately gets kicked out and told to never come back. On the one hand, I am on Martin's side. I think that some stores price things ridiculously expensively. But at the same time, nobody forced him to pay $6 for a can of dog food. I think the explanation was that he'd left the shopping until the last minute, and I don't know, maybe it was the only place they could go to that was open. But either way, I understand his opinion, but you don't need to say it out loud. And then we're down at KCL, and we have the introduction of Dr. Clint Webber, played by Billy Campbell, and he is the radio station's new host of the health show, and everybody thinks he is very, very attractive. And we have quite a fun moment with Gil where everybody thinks that Gil would have found him attractive because they think Gil is gay, and Gil is confused by this because he's always talking about his wife Deb. And Roz explains that they just thought Deb was his cat. Which I rather enjoyed. Gil is a really brilliant character, particularly in the eighth episode of the latest season of the reboot. Gil is, brilliant in that, but I'll say no more about that. I really love the character. We're then down at Cafe Nervosa. Eddie is sulking because he wants the expensive dog food. He tried that can that Martin bought, and now it's all he wants. And that is one of the reasons why I will not feed my cat the most expensive cat food, the very luxury brands, because I know for a fact she will develop a taste for it and she will sulk. She gets not very expensive food, but she gets luxury brand food on Christmas Day and on her birthday. And yeah, I can absolutely see animals deciding they want the expensive stuff. And well, even if Martin was willing to pay $6 per can of dog food, he's not allowed in the store, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. Frasier has a rash, which seems, this part of the narrative just seemed really underdeveloped or unnecessary. He had to wear makeup for a promo they were doing, and he had a rash or a reaction to it. And I understand what they were going for. At least I think they were trying to make him have something on him that would be, I guess, physically unappealing. Rashes generally are not that attractive to look at. And that would further make him feel insecure around Webber. But in my opinion, I don't think Frasier felt insecure around Webber because of his looks. I think it was purely because of his personality, his skills, his experience, and we'll talk about those in a moment. So the rash thing just felt really unnecessary. Maybe they were trying to do more with it. Maybe they did do more with it, but it had to get cut from the final script. I don't know. But it just felt a little bit underdeveloped. But it's fine. It didn't really affect anything. And Dr. Webber then comes into Cafe Nervosa. Frasier and Roz are there. We find out that he went to Oxford, and Frasier tries to one-up him. He name-drops somebody he met in Italy, and it turns out that person is Dr. Webber's godfather. So Frasier just doesn't really have a leg to stand on in this one. It seems like Clint, Dr. Webber, will constantly one-up him, and Frasier's not very happy about this. It turns out that he was squash champion back at school, so when they played squash, obviously he won, and we know that Frasier plays squash quite a bit, so that's going to bruise his ego. And then I wasn't 100% sure if he had ill intentions here. We're back down at KCL, and I'd love to know what other people think of this. Frasier decides to introduce Clint on his radio show, on Frasier's show, so that his listeners could be aware of the new doctor. And Part of me thinks Frasier was trying to not necessarily humiliate him, but just make him look less than perfect. But at the same time, I just think he was trying to support him, and I'm really confused in my own opinion, because on the one hand, Frasier's saying things like, I'm sure like I did, you'll spend the first few weeks trying to understand what all the buttons mean. Is that Frasier trying to say, well, I know what all the buttons mean and you don't? Or is that Frasier genuinely trying to be nice and saying, if you're stressed about it, if it's difficult for a bit, don't worry, we've all been there. I genuinely don't know. But it doesn't really matter, because apparently Clint did radio at school anyway, and he knows what he's doing. And then Frasier talks with a caller, recommends therapy, and then Clint says that actually he was quite impressed with Frasier's diagnosis, if you like, because he would have suggested that the caller was hypoglycemic. And when the caller heard that, they thought, actually, yeah, that might make some sense. Definitely showing Frasier up again. I don't know how I feel about Clint. Was Clint saying that to try and be better than Frasier, or was he just saying it to give his medical opinion? Was it even his place to give that advice? But then also as a doctor, would it be unacceptable for him to have that advice and not give it in a time when a person is asking for advice, even if it's Frasier they're asking? I don't have an answer to that. I think that's a very confusing question. But my point there is that I can't personally work out how I feel about the intentions of either character, which makes for quite an interesting episode. And we're then back at the store, and Martin is there with Daphne. And I will say, Martin could have just asked Daphne to go in and get the dog food. He didn't need to try and sneak in, but he does. He tries to sneak in when there's a different person at the till, and he apologises, and I really admire him for that. He apologised for the things he said, which I think was fair, and he's now allowed to be a customer again. He's getting all excited. There's a new flavour of dog food. I love the fact. I know I said I won't buy my cat the most expensive cat food, but if it came down to it, and that's all she would eat, I would. And I love the fact that Martin's willing to spend that money on Eddie as well. I think that's just, and his excitement as well at these new flavours, and Eddie's going to love them. It's so lovely to see. Unfortunately, Daphne kind of has some things to say about the prices as well, and she ends up getting kicked out as well. And Martin, because he's associated with Daphne, is no longer allowed to buy the dog food, which is unfair on Eddie, if nothing else. We're then back at the apartment, and Frasier is having this party for Clint, I guess, to welcome him to the station, and that's a really lovely thing to do. I genuinely think Frasier had good intentions there, and Niles comes over and Frasier tells him he just wants to find one thing wrong with Clint, one flaw. And I think at that point it becomes clear that there will be something will be revealed, and when Frasier is alone with him in the kitchen, we find out that Clint is not the best at singing. And Frasier takes the opportunity to allow Clint to sing in front of everybody. And he says it would be, not to Clint's face, but he says that it would sound so bad, it would, and I quote, peel the enamel from your teeth. Very descriptive. Niles asks Frasier if he really needs to humiliate Clint like that, and well, it turns out Frasier does. And Clint sings, and yeah, it's not the best. It's not the best voice. Frasier has found something where he excels and Clint does not, and that's all that Frasier wanted. We then end with Martin going back to the store and actually paying somebody to go inside and get the dog food for him, which again, I love the fact that Martin's willing to go to extreme lengths just to make Eddie happy. But I feel like it would have been much easier to just ask Niles or Frasier to go and get the food. But either way, he got it in the end, so that's not too bad. It's a good episode. As I said, it's maybe not the funniest. In fact, I don't know if there's anything in this that No, that's not true. Gil and Deb, who is not a cat, that exchange I thought was very funny, very entertaining. I think Gil is a brilliant character. Other than that, I don't think there's anything in it that's particularly funny, certainly not laugh out loud funny. But that being said, The Perfect Guy is still a really great episode of Frasier.